Now, folks, it's my delight to welcome for the second time on the show Liz Phillips, who is a former personal assistant of Nigel Farage when he was a member of the European Parliament, and she was also the organiser of the Great Resist, which was a conference held in Newport, South Wales, back on Saturday the 24th of June. So please say hello to Liz. Please send in your comments and your greetings as well. Hello there, Liz.
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm extremely well, thank you, Alistair, and it's great to see you and it's great to listen. Every time I come onto your show, or every time I listen to your show, I always learn something, and I had no idea that Alexandra Graham Bell's was so involved with the deaf, and I think it's a part of society that even to this day is sadly pushed to one side. And it was great to hear that a good Scotsman didn't only invent the telephone but worked so hard with people with a disability, which is wonderful.
Absolutely a tremendous chap all round. Yes. Well, last time we spoke, it was a few days before you were going to have your big conference in Newport, and I had not been able to get down to that because we had our event outside the SNP conference on the same day, where they were having their conference, their hopeless conference, to try to figure out what to do next year. And we made a bit of a scene outside that, and then we had a street stall during the day. But how did it go at the end of the day? Was there a good turnout?
We were full. You have to smile when you do something new, Alistair. I don't know about you. You're always a bit nervous about how things are going to go. And I've got wonderful speakers, yourself included. You very kindly did an interview with me, which we played on the day, alongside Jason Lloyd-Davis in Wales and David Vance from Northern Ireland, about keeping the UK together. We put all three of you together. David Vance also we did by an interview. Jason was there on the day in Wales, but we had a full house. Now, I hadn't looked at the sale of tickets because I thought we were going to either have, sort of 10 and I would just die. So I didn't dare look. We had an absolute full house from all over the country came. It was absolutely incredible. And we kept strictly to time. So we started dead on the dot at 12 o'clock. And we finished dead on the dot of 6 with an hour's break in the middle so that delegates could get to the speakers and chat to them. And the atmosphere was so electric, it was so charged, so positive. I came away, I was just absolutely blown. And we've got a second conference now on the 2nd of September in Peterborough, in the Holiday Inn Hotel in Peterborough, again 12 till 6. We've got a change of speakers this time, and to get every subject in that we need to talk about, because we are the Great Resist. So it's all the subjects that everybody's talking about, Alistair, that we need to have experts in, local experts, and also household names. So we've got a great mixture, and that's the 2nd of September. And then we'll have a third one on the 11th of November, Armistice Day in Manchester. So we're gradually moving up. So look out, Scotland, we're on our way. Okay. So 11th of November will be in Manchester. We haven't got a venue for that yet, but the 2nd of September we have. So it's a £5 entry, and just everybody that's listening come. But we had such a wonderful array of speakers that did everything from the fourth industrial revolution to climate change, to keep it cash, freedom of speech, the importance of individuals in the fight. That was Richard Vobes. Now, Richard, like you, gave an interview over beforehand. He couldn't be there on the day. He's going to be there in person. And we had Godfrey Bloom, The Dangers of Central Digital Currency. Now that's something that everybody is looking at. The age of the central bank digital currency is on its way, and we just had wonderful, wonderful speakers. Neil McRae, who is a doctor. We had a student, James Harvey, Students Against Tyranny, because these poor students in all these colleges, etc., are having such a rough time. If they go against the grain of they're not woke, they're having a terrible, terrible time. So, we had James Harvey, wonderful young man. And then we had the great Kimberly Isherwood, who is Public Child Protection Wales. And you can all see what's happening in schools with the education of children, particularly on the sex and relationships education. It is grotesque, Alistair, and the government are against her. Now, you'd think that the government, if you're trying to protect children, would be on your side. So there's something very sinister going on. So we had the great Kimberly Isherwood. All of these things can be found on our websites and what have you. All the speeches, they were great. And we're looking forward to a great day again on the 2nd of September.
Great. Well, just give us your website address. Do you have it offhand?
Yes. We'll put it. All the interviews, the full interviews, are up on www.freedomdigitalbroadcasting.tv.
Right.
And the previews are all up on the things like YouTube, etc. YouTube, Rumble, Getter. So you can find them anywhere, Alistair. And of course, The Great Resist is www.thegreatresist.net. Okay, and that website is still under construction as we speak, because it's a one-stop shop. So not only can you look at the resistance that we're all producing, but you can also look for the Trilateral Commission, the Illuminati, the World Economic Forum, and all the things that are going on that they're advocating they're going to do.
So that's very helpful. So is that correct? freedomdigitalbroadcasting.tv.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. And thegreatresist.net.
.net. That's wonderful. Yeah. You're a lot better at technology than me.
We've had a wee bit of practice. This is our 70th
is it really?
Good Evening Britain show. We've this is our third version of shows. We had back during the COVID time, we called it Saturday Street Stall, because none of us could get out the house, so we could, of course, but we weren't allowed to actually have a street stall, is what I meant. So that's when we got into doing a weekly show.
That's great.
Our Saturday Street Stall. And then in 2021 we had a Good Morning Britain, Good Morning UK, Have Your Say, in order to try to rival the absolute rubbish coming out from Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan, which was just terrible, depressing, anti-human stuff, really. So we tried to perk things up with a morning show. And
he's changed his tune, hasn't he?
He has, absolutely. But some of us don't forget. We're not going to forget what he and others were saying at the time, and they can't escape it.
I'm afraid one Scotsman called Andrew Neil was as bad.
I was just going to say his article. In fact, we've got his article here in the office, filed specially. So he can't escape what he said about the rest of us, which was absolutely terrible and frightening. I mean, that was a wake-up call for many of us when we saw the extent to which these figures of authority were actually against so many of us.
But Alistair, I don't know whether you find this the same as me. Can you explain how these people, you and I, perhaps aren't on the forefront, as people would say, but we can read, we can look, we can see, we can make decisions, we can look at two sides of an argument and make our own decision. How come these people have forgotten how to read and look at two sides of a coin?
Well, exactly. And it's very difficult to explain that other than saying that they have some deliberate agenda. because if they were just like you and I, they could have that particular opinion. But back then, they had an agenda. They weren't interested in it. And I noticed that today as well. I was catching up on some reading, and OfCom guidelines state that because the national newspaper, which is the Scottish National newspaper, is very intolerant of views that it doesn't like, and it always wonders why GB News continues to be allowed to say things about climate change. And so they're always wanting to complain to Ofcom about GB News and things like that.
Could I just tell you about climate change? For the last 2 weeks in July and the first 2 or 3 days in August, the reason why my cheeks are slightly red this evening is because we've got a big log fire going. It's so cold, wet and miserable down here, and we've had a fire going each evening. Now, I realise we're not supposed to have log fires because that's totally against Just Stop Oil and who all these people are, etc. But we've had to have a fire going. It's really cold. And this this is the heat wave that they predicted we were going to be burnt out this summer, I think.
Yes, they've weaponized the weather, as they say, just like they weaponized the common cold. The weaponized breathing next. They already weaponized eating to a certain extent as well, which some things you're meant to not eat. But basically, the Ofcom guidelines saying here that the scientific principles behind global warming are broadly settled and not an issue of political controversy. We do, though, distinguish between the scientific principles and discussions of the public policy responses to climate change. So basically, you've got to accept that it's a real thing, but we're prepared to allow debate on how best to respond to it, is essentially the Ofcom position, which, as you know, nothing is settled in life, whether scientifically or politically or in any other matter. These things are always constantly debatable. But
a similar news station to our own, Alistair, to yours and mine, put out 31 climate change myths debunked, where the end of the world was coming. By 2020, we were supposed to sail over the Arctic Circle because there would be no ice left. And the polar bears were disintegrating, their numbers were disintegrating. Now they're having to cull polar bears because they've, got too many, etc. So, the whole thing is just one huge scam.
Absolutely, it's completely mental. And how can the ice melt when for half the year it's in pitch black anyway? Well, I don't know how long it's in pitch black, but down there in the Antarctic it's dark for months. So there's literally no sun. So how can any of that ever melt? It's never going to melt unless you literally move the sun's orbit. So just before we go into talking actually about digital currencies and debanking, let me just ask the question for the viewers tonight who want to win the prize. Alexander Graham Bell is responsible for the invention of which household item? That's an easy one. Please do send your answers to contact@aforceforgood.uk, and the first person in there will win this, as well as a little credit card wallet, and we'll get that sent off to you tomorrow. So send in your answers to contact@aforceforgood.uk, folks. Good. Now, I don't think you mind me saying, you used to be the PA for Nigel, and Nigel's been in the news a lot, especially recently with the incredible debanking that he suffered. And we had heard in the past of people being debanked, but we hadn't ever, it hadn't ever been really made the news. But it was one of these things that was bubbling under there, especially during COVID when they debanked the Canadian truckers, and when the British government said nothing about that. that was a big wake-up call as well, because Boris Johnson didn't say to Trudeau, wait a minute, you shouldn't do that. That's not part of our Western tradition. That's not what the Kanzuk countries should be doing. That's not an Anglo value for the Anglosphere. That's not an Anglosphere value. He didn't come out with any of that. He just simply kept his head down and said nothing. So at that point I realised, crikey, they support debanking. So I don't know if you have had any thoughts on this, or if you have any information that you'd like to share with us on this serious matter.
Where would you like to start? We'll start with a smile. Yes, I worked for Nigel. I did all his the work that I did for him was the correspondence side, and looked after literally all of the written work, if you like, for him on that side. And I had a wonderful time working for him. The problem is, Alistair, that the Nigel that is reported on by the mainstream media, this hate figure, is one of the kindest men I've ever worked for. And, you know, I worked for him. I used to be in the office just after 7:30 in the morning. And he used to come in, having done a couple of early morning shows on the television. I've been literally bitten to smithereens, if you like, by this awful mainstream media of ours. And, you know, he put up with so much. And he used to come in, as I say, was one of the kindest people I've ever worked for. And to see him pilloried like I have to watch, other people are the same. People like Tommy Robinson, another hero in my eyes, Katie Hopkins, all these people who stand up, put their heads above the parapet, and you get this awful left-wing press. I don't know how we've managed to get them all down in our half of the world, Alistair, thinking of shipping them back over the border and shutting it. That's any help. But I'm sure you don't want them any more than we do. But, you know, they really are dreadful. And the things that have been said about Nigel are just totally 100% untrue. So there he is, debanked. Now, like many people, Alistair, it's almost, you're ashamed, I think is the word. If you're debanked, you feel shame. You feel you've done something and you don't want to talk about it. And Nigel was like this. He's actually said so on a number of occasions. But he hadn't realised that so many other people, and the whole agenda is to get rid of small businesses. Now, I'm not saying Nigel's was a small business. He was just a thorn in everybody's side because of what he stood for. But small businesses are their bank accounts are being closed at the rate of 1,000 per day at the moment. Now, that is because big business wants to take over. And if you look at everything from the UN, from the World Economic Forum, the Trilateral Commission, all it is talking about is big business. You'll get everything delivered to your door, that which you are allowed to buy, of course. So all small businesses, they want to get rid of them. And that's really what it's all about. And this is the bit that people have forgotten when they're talking about Nigel and bank accounts being closed. It is a deliberate attempt to get rid of small business. Now, this has all been blown wide open. And I wrote to the CEO of Coutts. I don't think it was my letter or that of Godfrey Bloom. Godfrey's was a lot shorter than mine, but very much to the point. He's a Yorkshireman who doesn't waste his words. Told the gentleman to fall on his sword, like any proper gentleman should do. I was a little bit more forthcoming than Godfrey, but this is all heading towards central bank digital currency. And if you look at things like patents, you'll see that the Bank of England have taken out a patent so that you get a chip, Alistair, under your fourth thing here, so that you pay when you go in. You don't need a card, you don't need your telephone, but you've got a patent out. This is the Bank of England for a chip to go under your skin, so you just put the chip down. Now, if this isn't about total control, I know people think I've literally grown two horns and a tail, and I'm an absolute conspiracy theorist. Go on and look online. You'll see all the patents that they've taken out. It's absolutely outrageous.
Yeah. and there will unfortunately be people who will say that's a good idea because, oh, that's going to be so convenient, without realizing that they're just enslaving themselves. And
Absolutely.
the government kind of roused itself to say that it was going to do two things in as a consequence of this debanking that's going on. One of which is it's going to extend the notice period for an account closure from 2 months to 3 months, to give savers more time to challenge the decision through the Financial Ombudsman Service. So 1 month extension for the execution basically there. And then the second thing that they're doing is banks will have to explain why they're terminating a person's bank account. So while you're 3 months later, while you're actually strapped to the pole, the man will actually read out the charge sheet fully against you. So I don't really think those two things make a dime's bit of difference, really. What's needed, I don't know what your thoughts on this are, but I think what's needed is a new law to say that you are everyone is entitled, certainly every British citizen anyway, should be entitled to a personal bank account. I mean, how difficult would such a law be, and why is that not being brought in? What's your thoughts on that?
Alistair, we used to have, before the post office was privatised, everybody had the right, because of course when the post office was privatised under the wonderful Lib Dem called Sir Vince Cable, who privatised the post office, everybody was entitled to an account, and that was right across the board. There was no question about that. That all changed, of course, when you've got private companies. They can do what they like, which is what the banks have done. So there is a move. Nigel is now, as you know, has got a website up for all those people that have lost their bank accounts either privately or through business. And so this is absolutely massive. If you think of 1,000 a day, and you think of the ones that have gone in the past, I mean, I think I'm glad it has happened to him because he has spoken out. But it's a shame in a way that many people didn't speak out a long time ago. This has been going on for about a good 10 years. And a lot of people have been debanked, which
Yes.
is so, it's a long time coming. But
Yes.
there's two things here. One, of course, is the individual. Second is the company. Thirdly, which nobody's mentioning, NatWest have made £3.6 billion in the first 6 months of this year. Now, I'm all for companies making profit. You have to make profit to have your staff. And also, yes, you pay your shareholders. This is obscene. Savers aren't getting the benefits. And you think of the people now that can't afford their mortgages, can't afford their overdrafts, etc., that are being closed down for that reason as well. But they've made £3.6 billion. It is obscene.
Oh, absolutely.
That's 6 months, not a year.
Yes, if you're able to set up a bank, then it is literally a license to print money, quite literally print money, as they say. But you're right about, thankfully, Nigel was debanked in the sense that I couldn't think of a better person to pick up the sword and fight on that particular matter, because household name, with Touchwood, hopefully continue to have a television program reaching every household in Britain, and also got a lot of sympathy from millions and millions of people. So it's so good that he's been able to take up that fight. But as you say, this has been happening for years, because I remember when Tommy Robinson was debanked, and nobody cared about that because it's him, and nobody wanted to stand up and go, poor old Tommy. But they should have, and some of us did what we could to point out that, well, whatever you may think of him, they're coming for you next. And back then, the government should have stepped in, and they could have said, well, we don't particularly like this particular person, but this principle of debanking him is wrong. But they didn't even do that. They didn't even try to make their excuses and try to just speak on the principle of the matter. So you had to realise back then this is a serious situation. But that's interesting what you said about the post office. I did not know that. But that's a very valuable thing, which has a very, very valuable thing which has been destroyed as a consequence of government policy. And will they bring something like that back? As
Well,
you're
it shows you
saying,
that
yeah,
it shows you it's deliberate, Alistair. If you think about it,
mm,
doesn't it? It just shows you it's deliberate. But Nigel certainly has done a good job, and I had to smile. One of the condescending, there was a 40-page report made about him, and I could debunk everything that was in that. Debunk, not debank. Debunk everything that was in
yeah,
that report. But one of the condescending things that was said was, he's very polite when he comes into the bank. And I said, when I wrote to the, yeah, quite. And I said, I can imagine, first of all, Nigel deals with everybody from royalty to the lowliest low-paid worker in the country. And he gives everybody, Alistair, I'll say this about him, he gives everybody an equal amount of his time. He doesn't look beyond the person he's talking to, etc. So he's wonderful in that respect. But I said, I'm sure your staff would be made up if Nigel had come into the bank. Why wouldn't he be polite? It was just the way it was said. Oh,
yes,
infuriated me.
yes.
Infuriated.
Oh, absolutely, and creepy the fact that they were looking into everything that he's done. And I was reading something in I think it was the Sunday Telegraph last week. Simon Heffer saying that who's a journalist, he got a phone call from his financial advisor saying that people are sniffing about you, Simon, because apparently you're friends with Nigel Farage. And Nigel Farage is a politically, what do they call it? They've got this phrase, a PEP,
Politically exposed person.
politically exposed person.
A PEP.
And so Simon Heffer's financial advisor was worried about this, thinking that you might be next, Heffer. So that is, so they're actually friends of friends. They're looking at who's his friend and
Well,
what's his
let me
friend
explain
doing.
to you. I've got no love of the Conservative. I've got no love of politicians at all. And Lord Lawson has just, Nigel Lawson, the ex-old Chancellor, has just died. But he had a granddaughter who is wonderful girl, but she has Down syndrome. And she was even denied. She's in a little business in Brighton. I think she's probably still doing it from what I remember, running a cafe for disabled people. And everybody loves her and the people there with that. She was denied a bank account because she was connected with Lord Lawson. It's his granddaughter, for God's sake.
That's just
The banks have got an awful lot to answer for, and this wokeness. I did say to the CEO before he left, the hornet's nest you've opened will never again be closed. And like God, let's throw the moneylenders out of the temple. That's my take on it, Alistair. Get them all gone.
yes, and that's been a long time coming, and let's hope that will actually come about during our lifetimes, because it's as if it's coming to a head now, and we are in the right, and more people are waking up. So I see it positive, and I think it's a positive thing. I think it's what was intended, as it were, that Nigel
15 minutes,
has to face this battle, and the rest of us can support him in it.
Yeah, the 15-minute cities are being thrown out all over. Canterbury's thrown them out. Thetford in Norfolk, Glastonbury has thrown them out. So there's all sorts of things, Alistair, now where the pushback is coming. So these people, these globalists from all these shady organisations think they can win. Well, they can all take a hike, including the bankers.
Absolutely.
I did
Well,
say bankers, didn't I?
that's what it sounded like to me. But
Thank you very much.
fantastic for this. I'm so glad to hear that you've got another 2 of your conferences, the
Yeah,
Great
yeah.
Resist conferences, lined up. So we'll stay in touch about that, and we'll make
Good,
sure
thank
to
you.
give you as much publicity around them as possible. The next one on the
Thank you.
2nd of September. So if somebody wanted to go to the one on the 2nd of September, they go to thegreatresist.net perhaps to buy tickets.
We're just sorting that out. There will be, if you go to the Great Resist in the next couple of days, just give us a couple of days, Alistair, and whether we're going to do it ourselves or whether it's going out to a company, that will be up tomorrow. Okay,
Right.
so give us a couple of days on that, but
Good stuff.
then we're all there. Okay.
Good stuff. Well, we'll speak again Liz, thank you very much
Oh,
for
it's
coming on the
wonderful.
show, and always a very passionate voice for truth, and lots of interesting material as well that you've got to share with us. So we look forward to having you back on.
I look forward to coming. Thank you very much.
Good night.